This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on ban on exit polls. The participants are Professor Subrata Mukherjee, political analyst, and Prashant Sood, senior journalist.
The Election Commission has banned the publication and dissemination of exit polls of any kind in the 5 poll-bound states from November 11 till December 4, when the elections will be over in these states. The Commission issued these orders and sent them to the Chief Electoral Officers of these states, which are Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Mizoram, Rajasthan and Delhi. The exit polls have been banned from 7 a.m. from tomorrow, when the polling will start in the first phase of Chhattisgarh, and they will be in force till 5:30 p.m. on December 4, when the polling will be held in Delhi. Mr. Mukherjee, how do you see this decision of Election Commission to ban the exit polls?
I think it's a timely decision because just before the election, there should be an even playing field for everybody. So within that context, it is highly debatable that if the opinion polls and exit polls really sway the voters. And there is a difference between the exit poll and opinion poll. Opinion poll, which really came out of the market surveys, Gallup poll and Harris poll, the famous polls, is based on the basis of political articulation and political belief structure. Exit poll is on the context of two ways. One is that you predict the forthcoming election, or you do it just after the election closes and predict the winner. So in that context, I think the Election Commission has used this prerogative quite wisely, that just before the election, though it is exciting and part of the democratic culture, and some will even say that they dance with democracy, but still, I think it's an appropriate step.
The channels have also been prohibited from telecasting interviews of voters after they cast their votes. I think that is also one of the decisions that has been taken. So how do you think this tendency to ask voters, especially after they've cast their votes, about whom they voted? Do you think it's of course telecasting it would be a little going too much, but as far as exit polls are concerned, how far do you think it's justified to ask them about their preference once they voted?
Well, I think, the ideal situation, there should not be any differentiation between secret ballot and open ballot. But it really does not happen that way. And the very fact that the secret ballot is a later innovation in the political process, it has a sanctity of its own. Especially in the context of our country, where reprisals are known, and the Election Commission also allows special kinds of preferences. For instance, the indelible ink that is mandatory in rest of the country, but many of the tribal areas, it is not used. Because there is a fear of reprisal. So in that context, I think again, looking to our situation, it is quite appropriate that there is a ban on this. Second important point is that many of the voters really do not tell the truth. There are a couple of considerations for this. One will not like to be identified with the loser. Normally, it is the winner whom the voter identifies. Second, also in the context of the family pressure, the clan pressure, the caste group and all that. So in a way, the independence of the voter will be retained best if he does not air his opinion publicly.
Also this thinking and this argument that the predictions of these exit polls are often not what the results come to be. So that's also one of the arguments against them. How far do you think that is one of the arguments which to those who oppose these polls, they say that that is also something and these polls should not be held?
Well, you see that the opinion poll and the exit poll are not exactly scientific. In the context of societies which have huge contradictions. For instance, in the Western countries where the ballot is more or less smooth and the voting is not something like a referendum, there it is quite predictable. You see, and also even the voting percentage, they are able to tell. For instance, you see, United States is a classic example of a two-party system with some fringe elements, and there the poll normally goes to 2%, except for the Paro factor. At that time, he polled about 20% of the votes, and in a way facilitated the defeat of the Republican candidate. In the United States, this is quite clear, where actually this is originated. In Britain, we find again that the party system is changing. Now it is broadly a three-party system from the classic two-party system. There also the predictions are more or less accurate. And in the continental Europe, where the representation parliamentary system, that the proportional system is normally used, There also people take to the voting in a traditional manner, and there, I think again it's predictable. In our country, the most problematic thing is that it's a system where winner takes all, and in the context of a multi-party democracy, we don't have a two-party system yet. There it is highly problematic predicting the future because 1 or 2% swing can really alter the entire scenario. So in that context, there is a problem. Second problem is, compared to the other democracies, the constituencies are very large. So if you really want a representative sampling, then it is normally a random sampling. So what happens is that the constituency of the opinion poll, exit poll is very small, and that did not reflect the entire mood of the electorate, because it is very hard to know what 1 million voters will actually do.
This issue of exit polls and opinion polls has been in discussion for quite some time now, I think for almost a month now. And the government, asked Election Commission to seek views of political parties, and Election Commission has sought views of political parties, and that has generated quite a debate because some parties are opposed to these polls and some are saying that, there should be some kind of restriction at least. It should not happen, they should not be telecast from the time the notification of election starts. And some parties are actually in favor of it. So there's quite a divergent view on this. Would you think the opinion polls should be telecast? Do you think it's fair that once the election process starts, especially the notification is made, these should not be telecast?
Well, then much of the charm and the debate will wither away. You see, there is a political process and there is a democratic culture that evolves. So it is a very serious issue that do you really ban them just after notification? That I think will be quite arbitrary. Because you see, the time limit from the notification and election is quite a substantive period time. And in the process of that, we find that the electoral mood also changes. And in the exit polls, opinion polls, we also find substantive changes and differences. So if you really limit it, then the entire fun of it will go. Because as I said earlier, I do not think the opinion polls really sway the voters. What it actually does is, it articulates the opinion of a particular group of people, and also there are lots of biases in it, you see, because there are a lot of political forces, and also the sociological analysis and the tools that are used are very difficult in a complicated situation like India, where many people may not really prove their own preference to any kind of a survey. So in that kind of a situation, I think what the Election Commission has just done, that is adequate. And if we really stop it before it begins the entire process, then I think the political culture will take a longer time to consolidate, and also the fact that much of the fun of an electoral process will be gone.
The points that you raise, the possibility of the opinion polls being manipulated, the extra forces that sometimes there is a possibility of influencing these polls, and some political parties have complained in the past that there are extraneous elements who come in to affect these polls. Do you think these are kind of, reasons for these polls to be banned or maybe some restriction put on them for a particular time?
Well, no, it's the argument of monopoly capitalism at one time, you see, that what happens is in a plural society and in a maturing democracy, there is not one voice. So to argue that it can be manipulated, I think is overstressed. And the very fact that X is really trying to put out a particular point of view is cancelled out by another point of view. That's why you'll find that in the electoral surveys that we find in India, there are wide differences, which again does not happen in the West. Because the West, it's a more predictable kind of election rather than India, where every election brings in new sets of issues, and also there is an element of unpredictability. That's why you will find that many of the chief ministers and important people fight from more than one constituencies. That again is a debatable question whether it should be allowed or not. But the fact remains that Indian political process is still maturing. It's in the process of consolidation, and in that situation, I do not think any kind of an opinion poll with the multiplicity of voice, the argumentative Indian speaks, there I do not think it is really advantageous to any particular group or a political party.
Those who support these polls, whether these are exit polls or opinion polls, say that, this is a manifestation in a way of the right of free speech and free expression. And, curbing them would be kind of curbing these rights also. How far do you think their argument is justified?
I think there is a lot of weight in this argument, because the fourth estate is an important component of democracy, and the press must have only to be controlled by its own ombudsman rather than outside forces. And as it is happening in many of the Western countries, that the peer groups within it is coming very severely on the wrongdoers. I think that kind of a thing will slowly emerge in India. So, restricting freedom in any form is counterproductive. They should be allowed to flower, and if a time comes, if there are to be checks and balance, that will emerge from within.
Actually, Press Council has given some kind of guidelines on this issue, and it has said that the newspapers should not allow their forum to be used for distortions and manipulations of elections, and should not allow themselves to be exploited by interested parties. That is one of the guidelines of Press Council. So do you think the opinion polls and exit polls somewhere can kind of violate that guideline that the newspapers have to follow?
No, if they are violating, there should be some check. But again, here I don't think the legal check will work. It is the moral check. And ultimately, you see, the Indian voters vote very wisely. And in a country where the poorer people take the voting much more seriously, any survey of CSDS proves that. I do not think this kind of manipulation, even if it is attempted with a lot of resources and a countrywide sweep, that will really alter the perception of the voters.
Do you think that those who conduct these polls, opinion polls in particular and also exit polls, they should come out with a methodology? They can bring forth, they can be more open about the transparency part of it. Because one of the complaints is that, they're not transparent enough. Do you think that will help kind of settle the kind of disputes or the doubts that people have?
Well, there is a problem there. As I told you, the constituencies are so large, then their credibility will be in doubt. Because you see, if you are interviewing 5,000 people in a constituency of 1 million, then it really no sampling and no exit or opinion poll. So there are inherent problems in India. So ultimately, the people really take something seriously according to their conviction and outlook. And I do not think that they really matter to the extent that such checks are necessary.
And do you think it's possible to have some kind of standardization on the issue? Because, some guidelines can be formed. For example, as you were saying, it's difficult for a complex country in a complex political system like India to have these surveys. Have found it difficult because of the sheer size of electorate. But do you think there can be some formula for these surveys whereby some kind of minimum sample size is fixed for a particular size of electorate?
Well, that's a good idea. But again, constituencies are so uneven. You look to Chandni Chowk and Outer Delhi. So those will be very problematic. Ultimately, the truth is, opinion should be fought with opinion only.
And how do you think, our experience for exit polls in the past, as you said, how do you compare it with the Western democracies, where some democracies, there is no curb on them, and some there is some restriction of time limit. So in US, it's relatively more free than probably it is in UK. Our experience, tell you with those.
You see, from the time of Da Costa, you see now, if opinion polls have also become sophisticated, you see. But then the psephology itself is not exactly science. And in that context, I think we will have to give considerable period of time for them to mature and really come to a conclusion whereby they will have the respect of some of the opinion polls that the West has. Because you see, in the context of India, the exit poll and opinion poll are contradictory, and the survey methods are also used in a very different manner. But the biggest problem, as I told you, the sample size is always very small. That leads to very contradictory results emerging from any kind of a survey.
There is a need on this issue to probably balance the feelings about right of freedom, right of expression with those, restrictions that are required for the electorate to be able to exercise their voting right freely and fairly and not under any undue influence.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on ban on exit polls. The participants were Professor Subrata Mukherjee, political analyst, and Prashant Sood, senior journalist. It came to you in the program News Analysis, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.